Dear students, today we are going to discuss about Introduction to Managerial Economics. So we need to know first of all what is economics in general and what is microeconomics, macroeconomics, and then we can know the nature, scope and significance of managerial economics. And afterwards we need to know about the functions of a managerial economist and what role he plays in the management team. These are the topics for discussion for today's class. So let us begin with introduction to the simple definition of economics. We are all aware that several economists have defined economics in a different ways. Starting with Adam Smith, he has given Wealth of Nations, an inquiry into the nature and causes of wealth of nations, his famous book, and in his book he has defined economics in terms of wealth, creation of wealth and distribution of wealth. And later economists like Alfred Marshall defined economics in terms of welfare, human activities and human welfare. And later Robbins defined economics as in terms of scarcity of resources. So a general widely accepted definition we can have, that is we may define economics as the study of allocation of scarce resources among alternative uses. So it is the simplest definition and widely accepted definition for economics in general. That is, it's a study. Economics mainly deals with the study of allocation of scarce resources among alternative uses. And if you carefully follow the definition, you know that the resources are always scarce, and they are not only scarce, they have alternative uses. That means the resources at the disposal of an individual consumer or an individual producer or a firm or even nations are always limited. And they are not only limited, they have alternative uses. So when resources are limited and when they have alternative uses, naturally one need to choose the best alternative. That is the subject matter of economics. From this we can understand that economics mainly explains it deals with the allocation problems of individual consumers, producers, firms and nations. So, take the case of an individual consumer. We know that the amount of money or resources at the disposal of an individual consumer are always limited. And he has abundant wants. So naturally any rational individual wants to maximize his satisfaction out of his limited resources. He will choose those items which bring him maximum satisfaction or maximum utility or satisfaction. Maximization of satisfaction is the goal of an individual consumer given the limited resources. Similarly, in case of a firm, the resources at the disposal of a firm are limited and they have various alternative ways of spending the money. Naturally, the firm has to select the best way of allocating limited resources. Take the case of a nation. Generally, a nation, what is the goal of a nation? It has to protect the welfare of people. So it has to strive for the welfare of people. The resources are allocated among the developmental activities which bring the maximum welfare to the people of a country. Coming to the individual firms, what are the goals of a business firm? What business firms normally aim at? While allocating the resources, you should have a goal. For example, we have seen that individuals, they want to maximize satisfaction. Similarly, firms or producers, they want to maximize something. They want to maximize profit, for example. The widely held objective of a business firm is maximization of profit given the limited resources at the disposal of the company or firm. So this is a widely accepted goal of a business firm. And later economists, they have developed alternatives to profit maximization because there are certain limitations of profit maximization objective. For example, the profit maximization goal presumes the prevalence of certainty and perfect competition. And we know that in real world, perfect competition is not possible. And also certainty, future is always uncertain, and a manager has to face uncertainty while taking decisions. So in the absence of these two, what is the alternative goal? Profit maximization can no longer be the goal of a business firm. Another problem is there are different concepts of profits. What is the profit, meaning of profit? Short-run profit or long-run profit? Or profit before tax or after tax? Or whether you want to maximize earnings per share or profit after tax? So these are some of the controversies. And so the alternative to profit maximization, which was widely accepted, was wealth maximization goal. The goal of a manager is to maximize the welfare of the shareholders. Being welfare is a very abstract word. What do you mean by welfare? So it is better to define in terms of measurable terms. It was defined as the wealth maximization as the reasonable objective of a business firm. Even wealth maximization also reduced it to maximizing the value of the business firm. If by different decisions like financing decision or investment decision or production decision or marketing activities, if a manager is able to maximize the value of the firm reflected in terms of market price of the share, the wealth of the stakeholders is maximized. So that is widely accepted objective of a business firm nowadays. And then there are other economists who have proposed other objectives of business firms like William J. Baumol. He developed the model known as business firms, they try to maximize sales revenue subject to attainment of reasonable profit. So the managers, they have a target, they have to reach a targeted rate of profit, and they aim at reaching that level of profit, and after reaching that profit, their aim is to maximize sales revenue subject to attainment of reasonable profit or targeted profit. Later economist Williamson, for example, he developed another model known as the managerial utility maximization. So according to this model, managers, they try to protect, they try to reach their targets, and once they reach the targets, they try to satisfy their own ends, their own goals, their own certain things which give them pride, like say power to invest, the number of people working under him, like that. Those things, they give maximum utility or satisfaction to a manager, and manager, he tries to maximize those things once, but here also once they reach the targeted profit. And an altogether different model was developed by Herbert Simon, that is called satisficing behavior. We no longer maximize, we satisfy after with a reasonable rate of profit or reasonable level of growth or sales or whatever may be the thing. Firms, they satisfy after reaching a targeted performance. That is called the satisficing behavior of Herbert Simon. And there are two more economists like Edith Penrose. He says that growth maximization should be the goal of a business firm, or size, maximizing the size or growth. Similarly, Rothschild, he says that long-run survival, it's not the short-run case, long-run survival of the firm must be the objective of a business firm. So we have so far seen the definition of economics, and we have seen that individual consumers or business firms, they try to maximize with limited resources. So economics is the subject study of allocation of resources. Now let us see the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics. The two main branches of economic theory are microeconomics and macroeconomics. What do you mean by microeconomics and what is macroeconomics? Microeconomics in general is nothing but the study of individual behavior. The unit of study in microeconomics is individual, be it individual consumer, producer or firm or industry. So the focus is on the consumer's equilibrium or producer's equilibrium or firm's equilibrium or industry equilibrium. So in microeconomics, the unit is very small and it is individual. Then what is macroeconomics? Coming to macroeconomics, here the unit of study is large, that is economy-wide aggregates. We focus on economy-wide aggregates. that is determination of national income, output and employment. Changes in aggregate economic activity known as business cycles, and changes in general price level known as inflation, deflation, and then say total savings, investment, determination of rate of interest. These are the topics of macroeconomics. So we deal with economy-wide aggregates like national output, national income, total employment, general price level, changes in price level, and then aggregate economic activity, changes in aggregate economic activity. These are the topics of macroeconomics. And moreover, not only the determination of general aggregate economic activity, and we have also seen that there are certain factors that cause changes in aggregate economic activity and also changes in the general price level. Then how to correct the disequilibrium or these fluctuations in aggregate economic activity or price level. So what policy measures are available to the government to control and regulate these changes? So there are two policy measures. One is the monetary policy and second one is called fiscal policy. And we know that the Central Bank of India, in our case Reserve Bank of India, has power over the money supply. It can regulate the money supply in the economy by way of bank rate or open market operations. Depending on the need, it can increase the money supply in the country or decrease the money supply in the country. That is called monetary policy. So that is the tool to regulate fluctuations in aggregate economic activity or inflation or deflation in the country. Depending on the need, it can sometimes increase the money supply or decrease the money supply. That is called monetary policy measure. Second one is a fiscal policy. So this is nothing but the expenditure and revenue methods by the government. For example, by way of taxation, the government can control the money supply in the economy. It can squeeze the money supply. And similarly, if the government wants to dump money into the economy, naturally it can undertake developmental projects, roads, construction of roads, buildings, infrastructural projects, ports, etc., so that money supply in the economy will be pumped. So that is how fiscal measures are taken, just to regulate the aggregate economic activity fluctuations and price level fluctuations. Then, so we have seen what is micro and what is macro. Now let us see what is managerial economics. Economics which is useful to a manager is known as managerial economics. So there are certain tools, concepts, analytical tools which are relevant to a practicing manager, and this body of literature is known as managerial economics. So economics in the service of a business executive is known as managerial economics. For example, Donald S. Watson, he says that price theory in the service of business executives is known as managerial economics. Price theory means nothing but microeconomics. Microeconomics is called as price theory and macroeconomics is called as income theory. So microeconomics in the service of business executives is known as managerial economics. And then we can modify the earlier definition of economics and we can derive a definition for managerial economics that is given by William Haynes, Motte and Paul. For example, managerial economics is the study of allocation of scarce resources available to a firm or other unit of management among alternative uses. So we have seen the definition of economics, and that is slightly modified and made applicable to a firm, the allocation problems of a firm, that is called managerial economics. How a firm allocates its scarce resources among alternative uses, that is the subject matter of managerial economics. And Milton H. Spencer, he defined managerial economics as integration of economic theory with business practice for the purpose of facilitating decision making and forward planning. So a manager is supposed to discharge the major function of decision making, and managerial economics helps in taking rational decisions, correct decisions. So, and one more definition is managerial economics is economics applied in decision making. It is a special branch of economics bridging the gap between abstract theory and managerial practice. So in economics generally, we are mainly concerned with model building, and sometimes abstract issues are also taken up. And in managerial economics, practical problems and solutions to practical problems, and using the tools, concepts and techniques that are available in economics for the purpose of solving of business problems is the study of managerial economics. Let us see the diagram given below here. We all know that business administration, or for that matter any manager or any company or firm or business, any manager is normally confronted with numerous decision problems. He needs to take several decisions on several aspects, starting from the location of the firm, quantity of product, and pricing decision, advertisement, investment. Like that, there are numerous decisions a manager has to take. So he is always confronted with a decision problem, and he needs a solution to the optimal solutions to the decision problems. And here managerial economics comes to his rescue. Or managerial economics helps or aid the manager in discharging his functions. And for this purpose, the body of literature has been drawn from traditional economic theory and also from other decision sciences. So, a separate body of literature has been developed over a period of years known as managerial economics, and the main concepts, analytical tools are derived from microeconomic theory and also decision sciences like statistics, operations research, linear programming, mathematics, etc. So let us see the salient features of managerial economics. What are the important features of managerial economics? And before that, let us see what is the difference between business economics and managerial economics. In some of the textbooks you will find the word business economics. So strictly speaking, these two are used interchangeably. Some economists use this word as business economics, and some people use managerial economics. But if you want to have a distinction, you can do it as the word business has a narrow connotation, whereas managerial economics means the principles, the concepts, the analytical tools, they can be applied to not only business but also to non-profit organizations like museums, churches or service organizations, voluntary organizations or educational institutions where profit may not be the motive. Non-profit organizations also you can apply the concepts. Then the word business may not be relevant. So managerial economics is a better word or broader term compared to the term business economics. Now, managerial economics is pragmatic. For example, in microeconomics, we use the technique of separation of price effect into income effect and substitution effect. Such a type of theoretical developments, model building, we don't use in managerial economics. It has little relevance here, and those tools which are practical and which can be used in real life are adopted here, like Kinko demand curve model, or say price stability and monopoly pricing, discriminating pricing. These are all relevant to the managerial economics. It is more pragmatic, that is more practical in nature, and it is eclectic in nature. Eclectic, the word eclectic here means it has borrowed several concepts from several disciplines. As I told you, operations research, linear programming, mathematics, statistics, accounting, marketing, all these have contributed to the development of managerial economics. That's why it is called eclectic in nature, that is borrowing from different disciplines. And it is normative in character. Economics is sometimes defined as positive economics and normative economics. What is positive economics and what is normative? Positive economics means it simply explains the relations without any value judgment. Take the case of law of diminishing marginal utility. The law says that as quantity goes on increasing, additional satisfaction or additional utility or marginal utility gradually diminishes. Whether it is good or bad, it is not the concern. It simply explains what happens in a given situation without any value judgment. That is called positive economics. That is descriptive in character. Whereas normative economics is prescriptive. It prescribes a choice, a solution to a given problem. For example, during times of inflation, the government has to adopt monetary measures or fiscal measures. These are called prescriptive policies. So similarly, when a manager is confronted with a decision problem, he has to offer a solution to the top management. He should suggest a solution to a problem. So it is, the managerial economics is also prescriptive or normative. While discussing about the business economics, we have seen that it has universal applicability. The concepts can be applied to business and also other units of management. And then, even though it has borrowed from different disciplines, the roots of managerial economics spring from microeconomic theory. That means majority of the concepts, tools, techniques widely used in economics are adopted in managerial economics. That's why if you look at the contents of managerial economics, you feel that it's more or less microeconomics in character. But the only thing is there is a difference in the orientation. Here you have to look from the point of view of management and how it is useful to solve a problem. And in economics we study as a theoretical model and building of models and developing some abstract models also. We have seen the nature of managerial economics. It is pragmatic, eclectic in nature, normative in character, and the main body of literature is drawn from microeconomics. And let us see the scope of managerial economics, or what is the core content of managerial economics, and what are the items or topics that are covered in managerial economics. So briefly, let me narrate the topics that are covered in managerial economics. Mainly, demand analysis and forecasting of demand. The first and foremost topic for managerial economics is demand analysis and forecasting of demand. So the importance for this is how much a firm can produce depends on the capacity of the plant, we know that. But how much it must try to produce or endeavor to produce depends on the demand for the product. Unless there is demand for the product, production is not required, is unwarranted. So, depending on the demand for the product, the production manager has to plan the production schedules. There should be demand for the product. Without demand, production is unwarranted. What happens if demand falls short of production, for example? Is there any way of rectifying or balancing these two? For example, here managerial economist has to think of creating demand or increasing demand or creating more demand by way of advertising or other sales promotion methods. And forecasting of demand. What do you mean by forecasting? Like weather forecast, a forecast is a prediction of future event. And in case of demand forecasting, we try to predict the future sales, be it next 1 month or next 6 months or 1 year. So that is fundamental. Based on the sales forecast, production schedules are planned, financial arrangements are made, manpower requirements are made, and the very success or failure of a firm mainly depends on how accurate the sales forecasts are. So we need to study what are the methods of forecasting the demand for existing products and what are the methods of forecasting the demand for new products. That is one major area in managerial economics. Demand, what is demand, and then forecasting of demand, etc. Okay. Theory of production. What product has to produce, what quantities are to be produced is the main concern in case of production. Here, the managerial economist is concerned with input-output decisions. What happens to output when inputs are mixed in a given proportion? For example, if all the inputs are held constant and only one input is varied, what happens to output? Whether output goes on increasing or increase at an increasing rate and then reaches a maximum and then diminishes. What is how output varies or responds when all inputs are held constant and one input is varied. That is known as the law of variable proportions, and similarly other laws there are there. So we need to study demand analysis and forecasting of demand, and production decisions, that is input-output decisions, and cost analysis, that is output and cost. How costs vary when output varies, whether costs also increase or costs remain the same. So we know that there are certain costs which remain constant irrespective of the level of output, like fixed costs. So output cost output relations and price output relations. Managerial economics is mainly concerned with the price, what are the pricing objectives of a business firm, and how pricing decisions are made under different given set of conditions. Another area is profit analysis, management of profit and investment decisions. These are the core content of managerial economics. Okay. Now, from this it appears that most of the areas are nothing but microeconomics in character. So let us discuss in detail the details of managerial microeconomics. So the demand which we refer to is known as market demand, and market demand is the sum of individual consumers' demands. So the starting point must be the derivation of individual consumers' demand, and once we know the individual consumers' demand, by adding the demands of all individuals you will get the market demand for a commodity. So the starting point is how derivation of individual consumers' demand by studying the consumer's equilibrium, or the behavior of consumer behavior, or better call it as consumer's equilibrium. There are two approaches to study consumer's equilibrium. One is called neoclassical cardinal utility approach, also called as Marshallian utility approach. And second one is called indifference curve approach or ordinal utility approach. So the first approach, the only thing is by using any other method, we can derive the consumer's demand curve. We can explain the consumer's equilibrium and derive the consumer's demand curve by using either of the methods. But the first method is based on a simple assumption that utility can be measured. What do you mean by utility? Utility means want satisfying power of a commodity. For example, if a consumer takes one apple, he gets some satisfaction. Can we measure the satisfaction derived by consumer by consuming a unit of a commodity like apple? It's not physically possible. But this first approach, cardinal approach, makes the assumption that utility can be measured or quantified. So there are three important principles in the cardinal approach. One is called law of diminishing marginal utility. It's a universal human experience, that's why it is called a law. What does it explain? So the law of diminishing marginal utility says that as quantity consumed of a commodity goes on increasing, marginal utility diminishes. Marginal utility, that is extra satisfaction derived with the consumer from extra unit, must eventually come down. That's a universal experience. That's why it is called law of diminishing marginal utility. And it is the reason for the downward sloping of demand curve. We all know that demand curve slopes downwards from left to right. Why demand curve slopes downwards? Economists could explain the reason by using the law of diminishing marginal utility. Second principle is called the law of equimarginal principle. That in simple it says that if a decision maker is having a limited quantity of a resource, and if that resource are having two or more uses, then he can allocate the units in such a way that the marginal benefit or marginal utility from both the uses are equal. That's why it is called equi-marginal principle. He has to see that the marginal utility from use A and must be equal to marginal utility from use B. So that is the principle of law of equi-marginal principle, and we can also explain what is the optimum quantity consumer uses so that he can get maximum satisfaction, and also derivation of consumer's equilibrium. And second one is indifference curve approach to consumer's equilibrium or consumer behavior. So this indifference curve, the later economists, they have criticized the first approach because utility being subjective element cannot be measured. How can we develop a model based on a wrong assumption? So F.Y. Edgeworth has invented this indifference curve analysis, and later economists like Wilfred Pareto, he made popular this technique, and R.G.D. Allen and J.R. Hicks, these are the two people who developed this technique known as indifference curve analysis. Here the two main analytical tools are indifference curve and budget line. Okay. Using these two together, we can determine the consumer's equilibrium, and also we can also derive the individual consumer's demand curve. So this is background literature for demand analysis. So friends, let us start with the meaning of demand. What is meant by demand? We have seen the importance of demand. So the production depends mainly on the demand for the product. Production schedules are planned basing on the demand. So let us see what is the meaning, simple meaning of the word demand. Demand means the number of units of a commodity that customers are willing to buy at a given price under a given set of conditions. So how much quantity people are willing to purchase given the price and given the other conditions like incomes and price of other commodities, etc. So we have seen the meaning of demand, and now we need to know what is a demand function, what is a demand schedule, demand curve, and the law of demand and exceptions to the law. So what is a demand function? In economics we use several functions like demand function, cost function, production function, etc. Always a dependent variable is a function of independent variable. You have to write the equation as a dependent variable is a function of the independent variable. Let us take the case of demand function. Quantity demanded is a function of own price, incomes of people, prices of related goods and wants. So that is why it is expressed as QD. Quantity demanded is a function of P. P stands for own price. Y, income of the people. P subscript R stands for prices of related goods and wants or tastes. That means on the right hand side of the equation they are called independent variables. A change in either of the independent variable, one or other independent variables will cause a change in dependent variable. That means when price increases, quantity decreases. For example, there is inverse relation between price and quantity. And similarly, income, when income increases, quantity also increases. When people's income increase, naturally they purchase more, so the demand for commodity will increase. Coming to the prices of related goods, what are the related goods? There are two types of commodities. One is called complementary items and substitutes. Substitutes are nothing but the alternatives. They replace the commodity. For example, if the price of a commodity increases, less of it is bought, and people instead of this commodity, its alternative will buy. That means the demand for the alternative will increase. So change in the price of one commodity leads to increase in the demand for alternative quantity of the alternative commodity or substitute commodity. In case of complementary items are items that has to be used together. They go together. So when price increases, not only demand for this product decrease, the demand for complementary items also decrease. So there is inverse relation between price and demand for complementary item. So that's how we have to see the relation between each one of independent variable and the dependent variable. Okay. Another simple technique is demand schedule and demand curve. In economics, to explain the relations or to make a proposition or theorems, there are different ways. One is by verbal statement you can explain a relation between two variables, or you can have a numerical example, or you can present in a graphical form. So this is equation form. We have seen what is a demand function to explain the relation between independent variables and dependent variable. For example, if price quantity relations are shown in the form of a table, that is called demand schedule. What is a demand schedule? Demand schedule is a list of prices and quantities, and the list is so arranged that at each price the corresponding amount is the quantity purchased at that price. You have to see that at each price the amount is shown against that is the quantity bought. And if the same data is converted into a graph, that becomes demand curve. So what is demand schedule, demand function, demand schedule, demand curve? They all explain the relation between independent variables and dependent variables. Then coming to what is the law of demand? Law of demand states the inverse relation between price and quantity. Generally speaking, there is inverse relation between price and quantity. If price increases, quantity decreases. If price decreases, quantity increases. That inverse relation we call it as the law of demand. So are there any exceptions to this general law? Yes, there are certain exceptions. There are three known exceptions. One is known as the Giffen's paradox, and second one is Thorasian Veblen's doctrine of conspicuous consumption and price expectations by the consumers. Let us discuss these three in brief. Let us see the Giffen's paradox. Sir Robert Giffen, he has studied the expenditure patterns of low-paid British wage earners. These low-paid British wage earners, they subsisted on a diet mainly consisting of bread and meat. When the price of bread increased, they consumed less of meat and increased the consumption of bread. So according to law of demand, we know that when price of bread increases, quantity of consumption of bread must decline. But here what happened is, they increased the consumption of bread and instead they reduced meat consumption to compensate for the total caloric intake. So that is a clear exception to the rule. Second one is Thorsten Veblen and his doctrine of conspicuous consumption. It is also a universal human experience that rich people, for example, they purchase certain items as when they consider it as a status symbol. When the price of certain items like gold, silver or diamonds are very high, they consider it as a status symbol and they buy. And when the price of such items decline, they may not be willing to buy because they are no more status symbols. That is called Thorsten Veblen's doctrine of conspicuous consumption. So they measure the desirability of commodity only on the basis of price and nothing else influences their purchasing behavior. And when price declines, they may not increase their consumption. And last one is price expectations of individual consumers. For example, imagine the price of gasoline has increased. If people anticipate further increase, naturally at higher prices they try to buy more. And similarly, when price declines, when they anticipate further decline in the price, they will wait for some more time and they will not increase their expenditure. So this is about demand in general, what is the meaning of demand and the concepts of demand and the law of demand, exceptions to the law of demand. And another important topic which is relevant to microeconomics and also to managerial economics is elasticity. The law of demand only says that when price declines, quantity increases, or when price increases, quantity declines. Imagine price declines by 50%. Whether quantity increases by exactly 50% or more than 50% or less than 50%. What is the responsiveness of quantity to a given change in price? That is the concept of elasticity. So a manager is interested in knowing the reactions of the customers. For example, if he increases the price by 10%, how customers react? Whether they reduce their consumption by exactly 10% or less than 10% or more than 10%. So he is interested in knowing the elasticity, price elasticity. So there are numerous concepts of elasticity like price elasticity, income elasticity, cross elasticity, elasticity of substitution, supply elasticity. So always, if you know the general concept, you can apply the concept to any relations, any relation between any two variables. So what is the general concept of elasticity? Elasticity is a measure of responsiveness. Basically, it's a measure of responsiveness and it is calculated, it is a ratio of percentage change in dependent variable by percentage change in independent variable. That is, on the numerator you have to write a dependent variable, percentage change in dependent variable, and in the denominator you write a percentage change in independent variable. For example, take the case of price elasticity. The formula for calculating price elasticity is percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. That gives you price elasticity. If you relate quantity and income, you are calculating income elasticity. Instead, if you relate quantity of A commodity and price of B commodity, you are calculating cross elasticity. So these are different concepts of elasticity. So by applying to two variables, you can calculate any type of elasticity. So among the elasticity concepts, most important one is price elasticity. Based on the value of the coefficient, you can classify price elasticity into 5 types. That is, if the value of coefficient is greater than 1, we call it as demand is elastic. If it is less than 1, demand is said to be inelastic. And if it is equal to 1, demand is said to be unit elastic. These are the three cases, and the two more extreme cases are if demand is perfectly elastic, that is if the value of coefficient is infinity, that is called perfectly elastic. And if the value of coefficient is 0, demand is said to be perfectly inelastic. So what is the relation between elasticity and expenditure? This is also very important to a manager. For example, when demand is elastic, here you can see the table. When demand is elastic, a reduction in price brings more revenue to the seller. For example, by reducing price from 10 to 9 or 9 to 8, you can see PQ is nothing but expenditure from consumer's point of view or revenue from seller's point of view. You can see when price declines, total revenue increases in case of elastic demand and decreases in case of inelastic demand and remains same in case of unit elastic demand. So this is also very much useful to a manager because he should know the effect of price change. If he wants to reduce the price or increase the price, how it is going to affect the expenditure to the consumer or revenue to the firm. And then how to measure elasticity. There are two types of measurement. One is called point elasticity method and second one is called arc elasticity method. And what are the determinants of elasticity? Why the demand for certain commodities is elastic and why the demand for certain other commodities is inelastic. The determinants are, there are three important determinants. One is the number and closeness of its substitutes, and then the commodity's importance in the buyer's budget and the number of its uses. The two other remaining elasticity concepts are income elasticity and cross elasticity. And we have seen that in case of income elasticity, you need to relate percentage change in quantity in the numerator and percentage change in the income in the denominator. So the second important area, this is about demand analysis, the crux of demand forecasting and elasticity. And that develops one important tool, demand side. Now let us develop the supply side. The background required for supply side is the theory of production and theory of cost. They give the inputs for development of supply tool, and bringing this demand and supply together, you can determine price under different types of markets. So theory of production, what do we mean by production? Production means the transformation of inputs into output. So production is simply transformation of inputs into output. If you convert inputs into output, that is called production function. So how to write a production function? Just like demand function, you can have a production function. Q here stands for output. Output is a function of inputs like A, B, C, D. These are inputs. Okay. So a note on terminology, for example, is there any difference between factors of production and inputs? There are four factors of production. We know land, labor, capital and enterprise when defined in a broader way, and labor and capital when defined in a narrow sense. They are called factors of production. And inputs are all the things purchased by the firm, not only payments to these factors. There are certain other items that are also purchased for the sake of production. They are called inputs. And what is output? All the things it sells, that is called output. So these are the simple definitions of factors of production, inputs, output. In production theory, basically we are interested in understanding three types of relations. One is what happens to output when all the inputs are held constant and only one input is varied. So if you go on increasing, say, number of workers, keeping land, manures, other fertilizers, etc. are constant, can we go on increasing output? Is there any limit for growth? So the law of variable proportions or law of diminishing marginal return says that eventually the additional productivity gradually diminishes, becomes zero, and if you continue it becomes even negative also. That is a universal human experience. Okay. And second type of relation is what happens if the firm varies two variables, labor and capital, for example, in different combinations. So we can explain the producer's equilibrium with one variable input or producer's equilibrium with two variable inputs, that is derivation or obtaining least cost combination of inputs. using the modified application of indifference curve analysis. Here we use the words isoquants and isocost. In theory of consumer behavior, we use indifference curve and budget line, and in theory of production with two variable inputs we use isoquant and isocost curves. And bringing these two together, we can derive the least cost combination of producing a given level of output, or the producer's equilibrium. How an individual producer attains equilibrium, that is the more important point. And the third relation is what happens to output when the firm increases all inputs in a given proportion. Imagine all inputs are increased by 10%. If output is also increases by 10%, that is called constant returns to scale. If increase in output is more than proportional, that is more than 10%, that is called increasing returns to scale. And increase in output is less than proportional, say only 5%, that is called diminishing returns to scale or decreasing returns to scale. So there are three types of returns to scale. One is called increasing returns, constant returns, and diminishing returns. Next important aspect for development of supply side is theory of cost. That is, what is the relation between output and cost? How cost varies when there is a change in output? So we need to study two types of cost functions here. One is called short-run cost function and second one is called long-run cost function. In the short run, we have fixed costs and variable costs. They remain constant irrespective of the level of output. They are called fixed costs. And variable costs, on the other hand, they vary according to the level of output. So in the short run, there are two types of costs, fixed costs and variable costs. And accordingly, we have average fixed cost, average variable cost, and average cost. And also another important concept is the marginal cost. Here we are using the word marginal to mean extra or addition to the total. You may define marginal cost as addition to total attributable to the addition of one more unit to the production. That means if you add one more unit to the production, what is the extra cost involved? Extra cost required, that is called marginal cost. In economics, we have several concepts like marginal cost, marginal revenue, marginal utility. So the meaning is same. Marginal always means extra added to the total. If you add one more unit to the total, what is the extra added to the cost or revenue or production or utility? That is called marginal cost. This is very useful and very important to a managerial economist. And the second one is long run cost functions. Here we need to develop long run average cost and long run marginal cost. So theory of production and theory of cost, they provide the background for supply side, and bringing these two together, we can have price determination under different types of markets. So for the last important topic in microeconomics or managerial economics is market structures, or price output relations, or price output decisions. So we need to study how equilibrium price is determined, equilibrium quantity is determined. There are two important variables here under different types of markets. Let us see how markets are classified. The simple classification of markets is very simple. It is based on two ideas. One is number of firms in an industry and the nature of the product. On the basis of these two parameters, you can classify markets into perfect competition on the one hand and monopoly on the other hand. And in between these two theoretical models, the real world situations of monopolistic competition and oligopoly. So altogether we can have four types of market structures. One is perfect competition, an extreme case, monopoly, another extreme model, and the real world situations of monopolistic competition or oligopoly or oligopolistic competition. So perfect competition, we say that there are two variables. One is number of firms and nature of the product. A large number of firms producing homogeneous product is the central feature for perfect competition. When there are large number of firms and if the product is homogeneous, you call it as the perfect competition. And in case of monopoly, the word itself says that there is only one firm. Monopoly is one firm industry and the product has no substitute at all. It has no close substitutes at all. It is a unique product. There is only one firm and the product is unique. That is called monopoly. And coming to monopolistic competition, what is monopolistic competition? Monopolistic competition means, here also just like in the case of perfect competition, large number of firms must be there. And the product, it should not be homogeneous. It is a differentiated product. Large number of firms and homogeneous product is the case of perfect competition. So in case of monopolistic competition, large number of firms producing differentiated product. That is the central feature. Product differentiation is the central feature of monopolistic competition. That means each firm, they try to create in the minds of the consumers that his product is superior or different from that of the rival. Take the case of different brands of television sets or different brands of cigarettes or different brands of soaps or any commodity. We can see for each commodity there are different brands available. But each producer tries to differentiate his product from that of his rival and he wants to convince the customer that his product is superior by adding extra features or extra service or by reducing the price or increasing the size or offering some incentives. He always tries to differentiate his product from that of the rival. That is called product differentiation. So, monopolistic competition, the central feature is product differentiation. And large number of firms and product differentiation. Then what is oligopoly? Oligopoly means few. What is few? Few means what? For example, if there are only two sellers, that is called a special case of oligopoly known as duopoly. Duopoly, for example, imagine there are only two sellers in the market for a product, for seller A and B, firm A and B. What are the implications? We all know that the total market is divided between A and B, and any course of action which is beneficial to A will be harmful to B. So naturally, whenever A takes some initiative, B will definitely react. He will retaliate, otherwise he has to lose. So there will be guess and counter guess and cutthroat competition in the market. Because if one fellow gains, naturally the other firm has to suffer, lose. That is the situation of duopoly. And other models like if more than two, we call it as oligopoly situations. So there are important models like Carnot's model, that is a two firms case, and Edgeworth model, Chamberlain's model, and Paul Sveege's Kinkard demand curve hypothesis. The last one, Paul Sveege, he developed a model says that the price once established is relatively stable. It is sticky. Under normal conditions it will not vary. The price established in oligopoly remains constant, remains sticky. That's why it is called price rigidity. The model of price rigidity developed by Paul Sveege, known as the Kinkard demand curve hypothesis. So, we have seen the core content of managerial economics and also microeconomics. Background to consumer behavior that provides the basis for demand theory. So, demand analysis and forecasting of demand, that is one major area. And theory of production and theory of cost, they provide the background information for developing supply side. And once you have the tools, demand and supply, now you can determine price determination under different types of markets like perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. So, in whatever may be the type of market, our focus must be on three aspects. So first, we need to know what is perfect competition, or what is monopoly, or what is monopolistic competition, or what is oligopoly. And then, you focus on only two aspects. One is how equilibrium quantity is determined, how equilibrium price is determined. The producer is said to be in equilibrium if he reaches the profit maximizing level of output. The firm is said to be in equilibrium when it attains MC is equal to MR. So MCMR, marginal cost, equality of marginal cost with marginal revenue, that is the fundamental rule for any type of market. whether it is perfect competition or monopolistic competition or oligopoly, equality of MC with MR that brings maximum profits or minimum loss. That is the determining of equilibrium quantity. How equilibrium quantity is determined? So, at that rate of output at which MC is equal to MR, the firm must aim at attaining that level of output corresponding to which marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. That is, this is the same principle for perfect competition or monopoly or monopolistic competition or oligopoly. Second one is the price determination. Normally price is determined on the basis of intersection of demand and supply. In all types of markets that is the same case. So this is price output decisions under different types of markets, and there are two more areas. One is profit management and second one is investment analysis. So we know what is profit. Profit is nothing but the difference between total revenue and total cost. And how profits arise? There are different theories, there are different economists explaining different reasons for the emergence of profits. So one group of economists say that there are factors of production like land, labor, capital and organization. The remuneration, the reward for these factors of production are land, it gets rent, labor, wages, and for the supply of capital, interest, and lastly the residual amount, that is the entrepreneur, he gets a profit. Profit is the reward, factor reward, remuneration payable to a factor of production. That is one version. There are other theories saying that profit is the reward for taking risk and bearing with uncertainties. The entrepreneur, instead of keeping his money in a bank and getting simple rate of interest, he is taking a risk of doing business. He is facing a lot of uncertainty of future. For facing these things, he must be suitably compensated by way of profit. If he gets the same rate of return which he can get from a bank, that's not enough, because he is taking a risk. He should be reasonably compensated. That is called reward for taking risk and bearing with uncertainty. Profit is the reward for taking risk and bearing with uncertainty. And another group of theorists says that profit is the result of frictions and imperfections in the market system. That means the conclusions of perfect competition are, in the long run, all the firms, they earn only normal rate of return. Whenever there is a abnormal profit or rate of return, entry of new firms will increase and they will increase the supply and price will come down and profit will come to the normal level. And if there are losses, naturally some of the firms will exit and supply will reduce and price will increase and the profit will come to normal level. Okay. So normal profit is the feature in case of perfect competition. But in real world we don't find normal perfect competition. There are frictions and imperfections in the market system. So naturally profit is the result of these imperfections. Lastly, Schumpeter, he says that profit is the reward for successful innovations. All the business people are going in a normal direction, but there are some enthusiastic entrepreneurs who try to innovate something new, a new way of doing something, or creation of a new product or new way of doing existing product, and finding new market and new methods of selling. They are always entrepreneurial, they are always innovative. So profit is the reward for successful innovation. This is about the profit theories, how profits arise and how to and management of profit. And lastly, the last important topic in managerial economics is investment management. So being the manager, his job is not only to raise the funds, the utilization of funds. So long-term funds are committed for acquisition of long-term assets using certain techniques known as capital budgeting or investment decision. So in case of investment decisions, the firm's funds are committed for a very long period and the decisions are irreversible. Once the funds are committed, you cannot dispose the plant, machinery, etc. For example, expansion, acquisition of a machine, expansion, diversification or replacement that require huge amount of money. So before investing the actual funds, the manager has to evaluate what are the different alternative ways of allocation of money and what is the best alternative using certain techniques known as capital budgeting techniques. And there are two types of techniques available. One is traditional methods and second one is known as DCF, discounted cash flow methods. In case of traditional methods, they are known as payback and accounting rate of return. They do not consider time value of money, and the other techniques are known as discounted cash flow techniques. They recognize time value of money. Here we have three important methods. One is net present value, NPV, and second one is IRR, internal rate of return, and third one is profitability index. So this is the core content of managerial economics: demand analysis, theory of production, theory of cost, and then markets, profit, and investment analysis. What is the main function of a managerial economist? Whenever there is a need for taking a decision, be it deciding the product to be produced, the rate or the price to be fixed, or deciding the quantity of advertisement budget, or mode of advertisement, or research and development, whatever may be the decision, he has to formulate, he has to clearly define the problem, he has to clearly formulate the alternatives, what are the alternatives available, and then he has to collect data, he has to analyze the data, and he has to arrive at a reasonable solution. So, formulation of alternatives, evaluation of alternatives, and finally suggesting one correct solution to the problem. That is the main function of a managerial economist. So he always chooses best alternative from among the alternatives. And then what are the specific functions of a managerial economist? Alexander and Kemp, they have given 10 important functions of a managerial economist from a survey of British industry. Let us see the list of functions performed by a managerial economist. This is self-evident. One is production scheduling, planning of productions, sales forecasting, market research, economic analysis of competing firms, pricing problems of industry, investment appraisal, that is capital budgeting, just now we have seen, and security analysis, advice on foreign exchange management, advice on trade, and environmental protection, forecasting. So these are some of the functions to be performed by a managerial economist. The last point is what role a managerial economist plays in the management team. This is very, very important. Being the students of management, you are aware that there are two types of functions, line function and staff function. Line managers are supposed to take decisions, and the job of a staff manager is to provide the required information to a line manager, and line manager has to take the decision. Now, what is the role of this particular managerial economist, whether it is a line function or a staff function? So, depending on the position of the managerial economist in the company, his function varies. For example, he is made in charge of a division, then he acts as a line manager. Suppose he is subordinate to a vice president of marketing, then his job is staff function. He has to collect information and he has to advise on a specific aspect. So William J. Baumol has beautifully summarized the role of a managerial economist in the management team by these words. Baumol concludes that a managerial economist can become a far more helpful member of a management team by virtue of his studies of economic analysis, primarily because there he learns to become an effective model builder, and because there he acquires a very rich body of tools and techniques which can help him to deal with the problems of the firm in far more rigorous, far more probing, and far more deeper manner. So this is about the role of a managerial economist in the management team. Thank you.